Hello, Namaste. Welcome to Dave's Hammer Show. This is the flagship weekly television shows of Indigenous television. In this weekly show, sometimes I conduct face-to-face interview and sometimes I conduct online video conferences and discuss about various contemporary issues affecting Indigenous peoples. In these episodes, I have invited Phnom Thano, one of the indigenous journalists from Thailand, who is based in Thailand and deeply working in the areas of indigenous peoples. And I basically would like to talk about the indigenous peoples' struggles and their successes, basically in Thailand. First of all, let me welcome him in the show.
Hi there.
First of all, welcome to the show. And to start with, could you introduce yourself and about your community and your work?
My name is Phnom Thano. I belong to indigenous people living in Chiang Mai, the northern part of Thailand. My work and my responsibility, I work for on IMN, Indigenous Media Network, which is focused on the representation of indigenous peoples on either alternative media and mainstream media platform in Thailand. And my work is aims to promote and amplify the voice of indigenous people from local community up to public.
Okay, we'll talk later about the Indigenous Media Network. Before, could you tell me a bit about the indigenous peoples of Thailand a bit?
Indigenous people in Thailand, actually in Thailand, there were over than 72 different languages, but only around 38 groups that define themselves as indigenous people. So mainly they live in three main regions in Thailand. First in at the northern part of Thailand are estimated at around 10 to 11 indigenous group in the highland, and then around 16 in the lowland, but still in the northern part of Thailand. Then at the western part, or at the we call Korat Plateaus, which is plain lands, there's also a group of indigenous people, many groups of indigenous people living there. And then when you come to the southern part of Thailand, there are four indigenous people groups. Three are Shaolei people, which mean kind of sea gypsy people. They live in the sea. They used to live in the sea before, but right now they move and settle their communities on land. And the first group is kind of hunter-gatherer. They're still in kind of very a primitive way of life, living in the forest or digging some taro and some kind of tree root they eat and stay in the jungle. Yeah, that about our let's say kind of geographical information about indigenous people in Thailand.
Currently, as far as I know, that military government is ruling in Thailand. But the Thai government has voted yes to the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in the year 2007. Could you tell us a bit to what extent the current as well as the previous government has been able to address the issues of indigenous peoples in Thailand?
So far, since 2007, when the UN draft got voted favor by many countries, Thailand was one of those. But in practice, in your country, Thailand or Thai government doesn't recognize the rights of indigenous people or even the existing of indigenous people. They said there's no indigenous people in Thailand, but the term that they recognize as is ethnic groups. Yeah, and that's why many rights, which is as indicated in the UN DRIP, was not fulfilled in the country. And also, we are being facing this kind of, um, I mean, the government does not recognize the rights, not just only the previous government, but almost every government, that don't recognize our rights. For example, um, the laws, rights to land, right? Many of laws, particularly law regarding forest law, national park bills, and so on, doesn't recognize indigenous rights to land at all, even though we are the one who manage the forest and maintain the diversity of the biodiversity in the country.
How Thailand indigenous peoples have been united and voicing about their issues and rights in recent days.
There is very long history about the united of indigenous people in Thailand. Firstly, they come to unite together because of they have a common issues, common problems. For example, since the first time they unite together, they marching, organize a protest, even take it took kind of over 1 month and almost 2 months in front of Chiang Mai government city halls and demanding for citizenships because that times citizenship statelessness issues and lack of citizenship was kind of critical issues. And since then, this become kind of loose network. And after we got a UN 2007, and then the network of indigenous people in Thailand, they come unite together. And we conduct kind of a key activity together every year in occasions of World Indigenous People Day on our 9th August in every year. Since then, we organize the event and kind of in celebrate in World Indigenous People Day. And through this event, yeah, we invite almost every stakeholder come to join our events and represent our issues, or we release our concern and statement. We perform our cultures and traditional performance. All of this activity is to demand for the recognitions of indigenous people right in the country, especially official recognition. I mean, to be recognized in the national constitution, for example. And a part of the network of indigenous people drafted a bill called councils of indigenous people. The idea is similar like Sami councils and Naga councils. It sounded like that. So we developed this kind of bill, this kinds of act, and all of the process is we involve the indigenous people at the local communities, and also it has done through very participatory approach. Uh, for example, public hearing and so on. So right now, the handbook is already done. Not the handbook, the bill. This bill already done. I mean, submitted to the parliament, but it's stuck over there. So the estimate, the ultimate goal is to get this bill adopted by the nationals or parliament. So that means that indigenous people will be fully recognized and they can kind of manage their self, their livelihood.
Like in Thailand, no doubt that one of the greatest challenges around the world that indigenous peoples are facing is non-recognitions. Besides non-recognitions, what other challenges do you think that Thai indigenous peoples are facing?
The most critical one about the challenges on land rights, because you can, as I said earlier, indigenous people living in the north or in the central part and even in the southern part, most of us have one common issue, which is land right conflicts. The northern part, they have a land issue because of their homeland, the other land was declared overlapped by national park and different types of protected areas. So that means that their livelihoods and their rights to access to national resources has been limited, very limited. Many of them have been arrested and prosecuted to the juridical process. That's a very sad story. And still now, none of us have gained or obtained the official land title deed. That was a problem. And imagine For the current people in the northern part of Thailand, they practicing a shifting cultivation, right? So shifting cultivation, or some another term is rotational farming. They have to shift the land year by year. But right now, after the declaration of national park and protected area, they can no longer practice that. Even though some community trying to practice, it's very risky to be erected. That's for the northern part. And then if you move along to the southern part, that has another issue as well, and another different issue still about the land right. That indigenous people in the southern part, they used to live in the sea, right, for kind of 1,000 years or even many generations, live in the sea, and then they have to move to the land or to the shore for some ritual ceremony. For example, when some people die, they have to bring the dead body into the ancestral body to the land to bury it, right? But right now, their cemetery got kind of occupied by business sector that to promote the tourism, because the seas and the beach is very popular in Thailand. As many of indigenous people have been relocated or shed out of their land because of the business. Yeah. Aside of the land rights issues, there are also another concerns by indigenous people, such as kind of their culture, their languages, that some languages right now attempt to be distinct, because children have to kind of leave their home into the city for educations, or even for find a job. So it's kind of a gap, a very huge gap between the children and their parents. So some language has been missing because of this kind of reason. Education policy as well. Sometimes the education policy which is decide have been designed from the central government from Bangkok, and enforced or implemented for all country. Kind of one shoe has to fit for all children. So that's the problem. Yeah. So the central curriculum of education sometimes is not relevant to their culture and their context. Aside of that, state-led issues still one of concern remain in many communities, particularly indigenous people with marginalized group, or indigenous people living in border areas. So many of them don't have citizenship or ID card in the country. That's very difficult, because once you don't have your ID card, you can't travel abroad. You can't travel from your district in your area. If you want to travel outside of that specific area, you have to get permission from authorities, for example. And you can't really have you go to hospital. There's no kind of very firm that support you if you don't have identity card. Yeah, that about the issues of indigenous people. And then just not only like that, another issue that I'm pretty much concerned is about the representation of indigenous people on media platform, right? The word that stereotype and discrimination are still now even less than before, but there are some of very huge media company keep practicing this kind of behavior, stereotyping indigenous people, prejudice, and kind of discrimination. Yeah.
Tino, you have already brought the issues that having no access and participation and voice in media that indigenous peoples are facing in Thailand. Lately, you have also established the organization called Indigenous Media Network and working to create an alternative media. Could you tell me a bit about the network, the Indigenous Media Network? Basically what it does, how you are giving voices to indigenous peoples in Thailand.
Yes, IMN is formed in 2017 by indigenous leader in order to be a platform, right, for indigenous people to raise themselves to the public. So we work on strategy. One, produce media contents by ourselves. Is kind of different media contents. It can be sometimes is kind of a book, a publication, and sometimes video clips, and sometimes it can be a poster for advocacies or and campaigns. That the first strategy, but it's with very limited resources and knowledge and skill as well. Second, we at the mainstream media, we work with them and ask them to work with us, because we found out that many of our mainstream media, they really kind of intentionally manipulate indigenous people, or intentionally prejudice indigenous people, because they don't have incorrect information. So therefore, we work with them, we provide them information, right? We ask them to report from the right one. And third strategy, we we follow up and monitoring the news, even though we work very hard to approach media agencies and journalists, or even some individual media practitioner. But however, the challenge is still some of the new agencies, they don't understand, and because of the trend of social media as well, everyone can post, everybody can share. Sometimes they don't have the idea that what is going to impact for, how is going to impact for indigenous people. So we have to monitor this kind of news on every platform. If we found out that some news is really negatively left impact to indigenous people, we have to approach them, or take an action against that kind of news.
In your conversation, you have said light the financial challenges for sustaining indigenous media. Besides finance, what other challenges do you think the indigenous media are facing, not only in Thailand but around the world?
Your question is, what are the challenges regarding the financial in running the alternative media? Right? So the challenges, for example, in the past 3 years, we have been training very huge number of indigenous journalists. They are able to produce some kind of short clips or some article, but finally they end up with that kind of effort, because sometimes they have to go to the field to collect information, even not really far from their community. Sometimes they need kind of technical support, camera, tripod. All of these are it has a price and it has a cost. So once we don't have money to support them, even though we train over than 300 of indigenous journalists, but finally almost all of them end up with this activity, even though they are really willing to do this kind of work, but they don't have financial support, so they can't continue that.
You have experience of building network of indigenous media and working in the sector of indigenous peoples. Why do you think the indigenous peoples need to have media in their hand and not basically utilize the existing mainstream media?
Most of mainstream media don't want to cover the issues of indigenous people. Maybe sometimes it's not really interesting, or it's not attractive articles that they can earn some likes, some income, something like that. That I think that's the problem. But however, there's a opportunities or positive matter. There's I like to mention to acknowledge one of the public televisions called Thai PBS. Thai PBS, which is the one. This is one of the TV organization that provide us space for indigenous people to raise their voice. They train out how to produce the news, how to produce media, and then they give us a space for our indigenous journalists to broadcast on their televisions. Because of indigenous people themselves, they are the one that knowing their own story, their own history, their own issues. So why not just train them how to tell their story? So then the right information, the correct story, and also the right solution will come out from the local community by themselves. That's very important, because if you ask someone else talk about your story, and if you ask that people talk about that people a story, it will not be even. Of course, they can elaborate illustrate some aspect, but not all of the issues that inside occurring inside the community. So it's very important for them to let the one kind of the owner of the story, the owner of the issues, talk about their own problems, their own concern, and their own story. That's very important for us.
As far as I know, an umbrella organizations of indigenous peoples, the Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, insert which is known as AIPP, which is based in Chiang Mai, Thailand itself. And it has also wing working in indigenous peoples communications called Indigenous Voice in Asia, if I am not mistaken. Do you have any connections with them?
Since the beginnings in 2014, we got support by this network, the I1 network. They allocate some kind of a budget and a project, very short project, kind of two and a half year of the project. Funding I'm in. So the idea of establishing IMN is it's happened before. Is many years before 2017, but before we can make our dream come true because we don't have financial support. But since 2017, I want an AIPP come and move their project to Thailand and introduce this kind of work for us. It's really matching in that time. So we, I would say that we have I'm in today because of the support from I1 and AIPP. And you ask how it works, a sign of financial support, also a technical support that they give us. And every year, for example, every year we have kind of a regional media exchange platform. So it invite media expert, both indigenous journalists and also non-indigenous media practitioners come together and share their experience. How about the experience on working with indigenous people in their own. For example, we got some from Philippines, from Malaysia, and come to share the experience together and look forward to our future collaboration in order to strengthen our own network.
So, indigenous peoples are struggling for voicing, not only in Thailand but around the world. In your opinion, what are the solutions, or what solution do you see for indigenous peoples for voicing about their rights loudly?
Yeah, we could say that one of the solutions that we have to work. I think we work and we walk on the right path already with established collaboration with mainstream media and build their capacity of indigenous journalists. And what we need to do furthermore is to kind of sustain this kind of relationship and sustain this kind of support. And we have to work consistently because right now the trend of social media, everything changes and the technology and change so fast. So if we have to be awakened or always alert about this, and of course sustain the relationship and keep learn new things. Yeah.
UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, insert known as UNDRIP. It's Article 16, if you see, which says that indigenous peoples have a right to establish their own media in their languages. To what extent Thai indigenous peoples have not been able to realize this right?
Why we are being able to take this kind of to exercise this right? Because of first we didn't get support from efficient or adequate support from the government, or even very little support from the government to form our own media. And secondly, I think the challenge are of struggling us for establishing our own media is about. Of course, I would like again to emphasize on the budgets or financial issues because we don't want to establish our own media and earn some money or kind of from advertisement from the company or from the private, because we lost our kind of freedoms.
At last, we are almost at the end of the show. I would like to give you this time to give a one-line message to the world's indigenous peoples, if you have.
Our voice is our rights. We have to stand up and voicing out the message from local communities to the public, create a better understanding among each other, both between indigenous people and indigenous people themselves, indigenous people in public, because I believe that understanding each other is can help to reduce the conflict and violence in our society.
Thank you so much, Phnom Thano, for your time and thoughts.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity for me and for indigenous people in Thailand as well to share our experiences or story.
Today, in this episode, I had a Phnom Thano, basically Thai indigenous journalist, and we basically talked about the Thai indigenous people's struggle and their issues, basically. And more than this, we also discussed about the indigenous medias and their challenges in not only in Thailand but also across the globe. And I have come to the end of the show. Next, if you have any queries or feedbacks regarding this program, you can reach me at indigenoustelevision@gmail.com. Next week, I will come with a new guest and new topics to discuss on new contemporary issues affecting indigenous peoples. Till then, have a nice weekend. Bye bye.